People say small towns hold on to their stories longer than they should. If that's true, then I'm sure Maywood Mills has white-knuckled its grip on theirs. You probably haven't heard of this place. I don't blame you, I hadn't either. Not until a couple of weeks back. And now that I'm here, I understand why. It's as if the rest of the world quietly agreed to forget Maywood Mills ever existed. And my gut says the town prefers it that way. As I write this, I've locked myself in a rented room above a bar. It reeks of dried liquor and bleach in here. I'm trying my best not to think about the people who've stayed here before me, or what they did between these walls. If that wasn't enough, the neon sign outside my window keeps sputtering in and out, painting the room sickly green. It's going to give me an epileptic seizure any minute now. I also jammed a chair under the doorknob, as I was instructed, just to be sure. Before I go to bed, I'm going to try to lay out everything that's happened in the last 24 hours. I apologize if I sound dramatic. I've covered some dark shit in my life, met a lot of broken people. But honestly, I'm lost. I've never seen anything like this. I can usually tell if there's a rational spine running through a story within the first hour of digging into it. But here, I can't find it. There's a legend buried in this town. A story that's been told so many times it seems to have hardened into truth. Yeah, the story doesn't just seem to live here. It seems to fester. It's easier if I start from the beginning. It was Carla who found the town first. My colleague. She drove in yesterday, texted me the route, said she'd find a place to stay. We were supposed to drive up together, but life happened, I guess. I screwed things up. That's the short version. I ended up spending the night in the hospital. Broken arm, 3 places. Don't ask. Anyway, I said I'd meet here in the morning instead. Our plan was simple: find Maywood Mills, dig into the string of disappearances that had plagued the area for nearly 2 decades, and more than anything, reopen the case that once had the town in the papers. Nadine Wiles, 13 years old, 1998. Poor girl had been stabbed, many times. More times than anyone who worked the original case ever felt comfortable saying out loud. The photos speak for themselves. They found her laid out on a flat rock deep in the woods. Whoever did it didn't even try to hide their work. There were no leads. Cops couldn't name any suspects, which left the community without any answers. Rumors took over. That buzzing hearsay that creeps in when humans realize they don't know what's lurking in the dark. Eventually, the case went cold. Officially forgotten. We came here to open it back up. Or at least, that's what I told them. Maywood Mills isn't on most maps. You take the ferry out of Seattle, drive west past Port Angeles, and somewhere along the Olympic foothills the road ends. After that, it's old logging routes that snake through fog-choked forest. Narrow lanes, cracked asphalt, and treacherous curves. I never thought praying for guardrails would be on my bingo card, but there I was, wishing for them. Blink and you'll miss the turnoff. Keep driving and you'll dead end at some old dam. That's what Carla texted me. So obviously, my GPS gave up halfway, and she wasn't answering her phone. So I had to navigate the foothills by myself, one hand on the wheel, the other in a cast, playing chicken with blind corners. I'd like to see Schumacher try. Somewhere outside the town limits, I nearly wrecked my Porsche. The pavement was slick from yesterday's torrential rain. A turn came up fast. I got distracted by a message on the phone, some legal bullshit that's been chewing on my ankles for weeks. I got angry. Lost focus. Swerved. Came a few feet shy of turning myself into tree decor. That's when I got my first real sense of the place. I hadn't even reached town yet, but something already felt off. I staggered out of the car and threw up on the shoulder. Then, everything went quiet. Not peaceful quiet, more like an eerie silence. The kind of silence I imagine falls in a jungle when a predator stalks its prey. The trees, insects, birds, even the nearby river. It was like the entire forest held its breath. Then, somewhere in the distance, the dam released a sheet of water with a thunderous roar. I nearly leaped out of my skin. That's when I saw it, a moss-covered sign slumping in the brush. "Welcome to Maywood Mills." I looked through the case files scattered across the passenger seat. I had an old photograph of the same sign, from 30 years ago. Back then, the paint was fresh. The letters straight. Someone cared back then, but I guess they had every right to stop. I've always had a strange pull toward towns like this. I couldn't tell you exactly why. Maybe it's because I grew up in noise. Traffic, sirens, shrieking subway brakes. I'm a city rat by design. But places like this, they hum with a certain promise. You could disappear here. You could be nobody. No headlines, no pressure, no past dogging your heels. There was peace to be found. However, that charm wears thin the longer you look. Because underneath the quiet, there's this weight. Like the atmosphere itself wants you to shrink. To stay small. To forget there's a world beyond the woods. Nobody says it out loud, but you can feel the rules immediately. Dreaming is illegal here. Curiosity is an offense. They don't like people leaving, and they like people arriving even less. That's what kills the dream for me. Not the isolation. Not the decay. The people. As I drove in, nobody waved. Nobody smiled. They just watched me roll past, faces blank and weathered, carved like worn gravestones. The only thing alive was their eyes, full of resentment, and something else, something heavy I couldn't place at first. Suspicion. Grief. Maybe fear? Or maybe it was just the big yellow letters FBI on my jacket that spooked them. Maywood Mills itself didn't offer much to look at. A couple dozen houses, most of them sagging or boarded up. A handful of stubborn businesses clinging to life. There was a school and a church that had seen better days. And, of course, a bar. As if the depressing atmosphere wasn't poisonous enough. However, there was one thing that really caught my attention. The graffiti. Spray painted across abandoned storefronts, rusting garage doors, and brick walls, was the same image, over and over. A face, a crude drawing of a tall, skeletal figure in a long coat and top hat. His eyes were black, empty hollows. On some of the portraits he was almost a skull. Then he had this wide, childish grin that stretched ear to ear. It really got under my skin for some reason. Most of the time, he was drawn holding a ring of keys. Not a few keys like the ones you and I own. No, it was a massive, jangling hoop of them. If you remember the keymaker from The Matrix, you'll know exactly what I mean. I parked outside the bar. The whole building looked like it was one good gust away from collapsing. I doubted they'd cleaned the taps since the Reagan administration, but hey, beer is beer, and I'm not picky. Plus, I noticed they rented out rooms upstairs. If Carla was anywhere in this town, odds were she'd be here. The very moment I stepped inside, the ongoing conversations died mid-sentence. It looked exactly the way I imagined it. Wood-paneled walls, floorboards that stuck to your shoes, a few regulars slumped around the edges, and a jukebox that clearly lost the will to live. The floor creaked as I approached the bar. I flashed my badge, ordered a beer, and slid a photo across the counter. Carla's face stared up between the bartender and me. "She came in yesterday," I said. "Have you seen her?" The bartender, her name was Lucy, took her time with the photo. Meanwhile, I studied her. She was way too pretty to be marooned in a town like this. Finally, she shook her head. "Can't say I have." Then, after a beat, "Sorry, but no outsiders have come through here in weeks. Maybe months." Her eyes came up to meet mine. "What brings the FBI to Maywood Mills?" "We're reopening an old case," I told her. "Nadine Wiles." That name hit the room like a bell tone. Conversations that had just started picking up fell silent again. I could hear the drunks in the corner shift in their seats, glasses pause halfway to their mouths. I felt their eyes burn in the back of my neck. One of them even stood up like he meant to leave, then thought better of it. Lucy didn't react much, but something shifted behind her eyes. Sadness, I think. She was hard to read. Then, she nodded slowly, like she'd been waiting for this to happen. Figured someone would come back around eventually, she said. Why didn't you and your partner come in together? I glanced down at the cast around my arm and tapped it lightly. Got delayed. Long story. She glanced down at it, said nothing. It almost made me uncomfortable, so I steered us back to the subject. So, Nadine Willies. You knew her? Sure. Everyone did, she said. We went to the same school. Or, I mean, all of us did. She gestured to the drunks in the corner who were still staring at me. Listen, you're not exactly digging through pleasant memories. Countless investigators have been here over the years. Cops, journalists, crime junkies. And none of them got anywhere? I asked. We already know who did it, she said. Who? She nodded past my shoulder. He's right behind you. I turned. Out the window, across the cracked parking lot, sprayed across the brick wall, that painted face stared right back at me. That? I said, trying not to sound amused. You're saying that thing killed Nadine? She nodded. One of the drunks, a handyman, barked a laugh and swiveled on his stool. Hell, he's behind all the weird shit that happens around here. Half this town swears they've seen him. Especially after a few drinks. He laughed. So did his friends. Lucy leaned a little closer, voice low enough to cut under the noise. Ignore them. They've been here since breakfast. But unfortunately, they're not wrong. She held my gaze. I'm sorry, Agent. But you're chasing a ghost. I didn't know what to say. Lucy pointed toward a map taped beside the register, and showed me the quickest route to the nearest motel, said Carla might have checked in there. It felt like a nice and subtle way of saying, leave. So I didn't. There were vacant rooms upstairs, nothing close to 5 stars. But if Carla had checked into some motel miles away for a bit of luxury, she had another thing coming. This town is where the conversations were. This was where work was. So instead of heading for the door, I ordered steak and eggs and a room for the night. While Lucy disappeared into the kitchen, the handyman peeled himself off his stool and shuffled over. He was in his mid-40s, with a bloated red face, breath sour with Miller Lite. He sat down beside me without asking. His name's Mr. Jangles, he said, jerking his chin toward the fogged window. Nadine Wiles was his first. Back in '98, all the kids said it was him. Lives out in the woods past the dam. Nobody ventures out there alone anymore. Mr. Jangles? I repeated, trying not to let the skepticism show too much. That's right. That's what they called him. They say he has keys to every house in Maywood. That's how you know he's close. You hear him. He mimed the sound, shaking his wrist a little. Ching, ching. More barking from his friends. I looked back through the window. At that damned face. The top hat. The smile. The black, empty sockets. I have to admit, it creeped me out a little. So the Bureau's chasing campfire stories now? He asked, squinting. I let the question hang. Urban legends don't bother me. Lies do, I said eventually. We're here for the truth. He let out a dry, smoker's chuckle and tapped the bar with his dirty finger, right on the badge I'd left resting beside my glass. Might want to get that fixed, he said. It's chipped. I glanced down. He wasn't wrong. The edge was scuffed. The cheap laminate curling just a little. I palmed it without saying anything. Lucy came back and set the plate down in front of me. If you're serious about digging into this, she said, talk to Mrs. Wiles. She's still out on the edge of town. Pink house. You can't miss it. She keeps to herself. She hesitated, then added, and do me a favor. Don't tell her I sent you. I finished my food and headed back out. The sky looked bruised, like the rain was thinking about coming back. I followed Lucy's directions along the cracked road, snapping a few photos of Mr. Jangles on the way. I couldn't wait to hear what Carla would make of all this. Lucy was right. The house was impossible to miss. Faded pink siding, shutters hanging crooked. Even in the middle of the afternoon, the curtains were drawn. The yard was crowded with the remains of a life that used to be loving and busy, material for an abandoned tree house, rusted tools, a collapsing stroller, a weather-beaten swing set. It broke my heart a little. I'll fast forward through most of it. You've seen the scene before. A grieving mother loses her child, blames the world, and shuts the door on it. Nothing new there. But I walked away with two things, or three, if I'm being honest. First, she gave me a USB drive. Said it contained everything they managed to pull from Nadine's old computer. According to her, Nadine recorded a message the day before she died. Second, Mrs. Wiles didn't talk about Mr. Jangles the way the guys at the bar did. No jokes. No eye-rolling. No. She spoke of him like any other suspect I've come across. And then there was the last thing. While she went to her bedroom to look for the USB, my eyes wandered around Nadine's room. I found her old diary from the summer she died tucked in the back of a shelf. I shouldn't have taken it. But I did. Mrs. Willis came back a minute later and pressed the USB into my good hand. You should barricade your door tonight, Agent, she said. Shut your blinds. If someone knocks, don't answer. Stay still. Don't look out if you hear anything. So, that was my day. By the time I headed back, the sun was dying behind the tree line. I called Carla again. She didn't answer. What the hell is she up to? I'll drive out to that motel tomorrow if I have to. I'm going to need her on this. She's the charming one, the one people usually open up to. I'm better at the technical stuff, and pushing people over the edge. Oh, and one last thing. I checked the USB. I've only ever seen photos of Nadine with 19 stab wounds in her body, so it was strange, wrong almost, to see her alive. I felt like I was watching a ghost. But there she was on my screen, sitting cross-legged on her bed like any other kid after school. She looked straight into the camera. He came back today, she said. During break. He wanted me to introduce him to the other kids. She smiled. I wrote a poem, she said. For him. She began to read. As I was walking through the park, I saw a figure in the dark. His mask was white, his eyes like coal, a chilling sight that froze my soul. He wore a hat upon his head, and from his mouth no words were said. He danced for me with jangling keys, and whispered secrets in the breeze. Mr. Jangles, tall and grim, would find the children, calling him. He'd come for those who dared to stray, to never see the light of day. I think someone just tried the handle on my door. I couldn't hear any footsteps in the hall, but the door definitely rattled. Someone tried to get in. A moment later, I heard a set of keys jingle downstairs. Maybe Lucy's locking up the bar and wanted to check on me. I mean, what else could it be? That's the story I'm choosing. Anyway, I need to fix the badge before I go to sleep. They say small towns hold on to their stories longer than they should. Out here, I'm starting to think that the story holds on to the town. Tomorrow, I'm going to find Carla. I'll probably swing by the school, too. The teachers must know something. I need to gather as much material as I can before someone figures out who I am. Before someone catches me in the lie. Do you remember the trumpets in the sky? It happened back in 2012 when everyone thought the world was going to end. The sound of trumpets began blaring throughout several different countries and kept it up for hours. Belgium, the US, Brazil. The trumpets weren't an entirely unknown phenomenon. There have been reports of them dating back centuries. This one was different. Hardly anyone who wasn't there still remembers it, and even those who were have a hard time. It was like no one wanted to talk about it after it happened, like it was a momentary lapse in judgment by the universe and everyone just got on with their day. But I was there. I remember. The weather was, for all intents and purposes, perfect that day. In a rural part of Iowa, I was out tending to my crops when the trumpets began. My hands were working in the soil, tearing weeds from the ground that threatened to choke my food. I almost fell flat on my ass when I heard it. It was utterly deafening. The noise came, and for a moment, I thought that a tornado had just popped up out of nowhere and I shot to my feet to search for it. But there was nothing, not a cloud in the sky, and only the slightest of breezes to keep me from melting in the summer heat. My next thought was that we were under attack. Some foreign country had just waged war with the United States, and backwater Iowa was their first target. But again, as I looked up, there wasn't any sign of bomber jets or helicopters, or hell, even a commercial plane in the sky. No old chemtrails. No new ones. The world was entirely peaceful, except for that awful playing of the trumpets. I covered my ears with my soil-wet hands and hurried toward the house. Even with my hands pressed as tightly to my head as I could muster, it barely helped the sound. The harsh, grating noise penetrated all of my senses and threatened to drive me mad. It had only been a minute or two at this point, but it was already too much to bear. I reached my door, flung it open, and shut myself inside. It was no better there than it had been in the field. I could see my windows vibrating from the noise. I wondered if they would break, if whatever bastards who were doing this had engineered their sound just right to bust in all the windows in America. How long would it take before they burst? Or what about me? Would my ears begin to bleed? Would my eardrums explode? What about my eyes? Could a sound even do that? I felt like it could. The trumpets reverberated through my whole body. It felt like something was inside trying to get out. The floorboards vibrated beneath me and hummed against the drone of the trumpets. My arms quaked as I held my head. I had to find something to stop the noise. I was a hunter on occasion, only when my eldest wanted to go out to shoot buck. I kept my rifles in a closet by the basement, and there was the rest of the gear, too. I knew I had to get my hearing protection. I stumbled through the house, eyes blurry from the disorientation. Who knew a sound could disrupt your day so much? I tried to keep my hands over my ears for as long as possible before I finally had to grab the handle of the door. I yanked it open and hurried to get my headphones from their case. Inside, I kept a spare pair of foam earbuds as well, so I quickly shoved those in, put on the protection, and slammed the door shut. It was better, but only mildly. I thought that at the very least I would be able to bear it. The maddening feeling died down. I wasn't sure how much time had passed then, maybe 5 minutes, but I certainly had no clue when it would stop. It didn't stop, not for hours. Where I was, it was hard to reach anyone without a landline. I didn't have enough service to get my iPhone to make calls that sounded any better than the inside of a blender, so I only used it when I was in town. And at this point, with my ears covered and certainly no way to discern what someone would be saying on the other end of the line, I didn't bother to ring my neighbors. I lived alone, too. No one I could confirm this horrible trumpeting with, no one who could share my experiences. By the first hour, I was starting to wonder if it was all in my head. I sat at my dining table with my hands clasped and stared out into the field. I could see the glass panes of my windows vibrating around the edges, threatening to jump out. The plants outside swayed softly in the breeze, as if entirely oblivious to the assault. I had no animals that I needed to check on, which I was very thankful for. I don't know how I could have sheltered a whole farm from this noise. I remember feeling entirely hopeless. As 1 hour turned to 2, my body shook. I didn't know if it was nerves or the trumpets. It felt bad, whatever it was. I was trapped in my own home from something I had no power to stop. I had tried turning on the TV to see if anyone was covering the trumpets, but all I got was a blue screen and a warning. Severe weather alert, do not leave your home, remain indoors, wear ear protection. Comforting. Made me think that even the higher-ups were oblivious. Did no one know what was going on? By 2.5 hours I said fuck this. I needed to find someone who knew what was happening. I needed to check if my neighbors were okay, if they'd gotten any news. So, for good measure, I grabbed one of my rifles, hopped in my truck, and headed down the road to Merle's house. The man was standing in his front lawn when I got there. I turned down his driveway and headed up to his house, and there, about 30 feet from his front door, he just stood and looked into the sky. His back was facing me, and I couldn't see what he was doing with his hands on his face. I just knew that I found it entirely strange that he wasn't wearing anything to block the noise. "Merle?" I shouted. I could barely even hear my own voice. "Merle!" I knew it was in vain, but I shouted anyhow as I walked up to him with my rifle in hand. I almost puked when I got to him. As I stepped in front of Merle, everything I had eaten that day and the last threatened to come up out of me. Blood poured down the front of him, staining his overalls and his wife beater. His hands clawed at his face as he stared into the sky in abject horror. He had dug deep crevices into his cheeks, and one of his fingers was fish-hooking his eyelid. It pulled downward in a slow yet powerful movement, and I saw the edges of his eyes start to tear. His tear ducts slowly ripped open and cried blood, and the meat under his eyes swelled with it. I could see the entire underside of his eyeball, perfectly exposed to the outside world. I didn't know how he was still standing. I stumbled backwards and took in the horror that was Merle. The strip of skin connected to the eyelid peeled down his face and stopped just in the middle of his cheek, or what was left. It disconnected and fell to the ground while Merle raised his hand again and began digging into his flesh once more. Jesus Christ, Merle! I couldn't even keep the tears out of my eyes. This was most certainly the worst thing I had ever seen. I'd known Merle for many years, ever since I'd moved into the plot of land down the road. The old man had helped me out so many times, and I him. And now he was mutilating himself in the wake of this monstrosity. I only watched him a moment longer. The amount of blood on his front and pooling around his feet was almost to the point where he couldn't do anything anymore. It only took a few moments more of clawing and peeling before he crumpled to the ground and lay there, dirt infecting his wounds, blood seeping into the soil. I got out of there as fast as I could. There was nothing I could do for him. I couldn't call the police if I'd wanted to. No one would have been able to hear me. Besides, I was certain their lines were backed up with concerns of the trumpets. I drove my truck down to the next set of neighbors on my road, Jensen and Mary. A happy couple who had just said goodbye to their kids and were empty nesters. When I rolled up in their driveway, I saw the door to their barn was precariously left open. Fuck. I didn't even know why I bothered talking at that point. The blaring trumpets drowned it out entirely every time. It was no use, but I still did it. Rifle in hand once again, I stalked toward the open barn. I was far more cautious this time, my guard fully up. I didn't know what might be waiting for me inside. I should have expected it, really, what with Merle's condition. Swinging side to side from one of the rafters was Mary. She was long gone by then, a limp sack of meat dangling from the sky. Her white dress billowed around her as a breeze swept through, turning her body around in a circle. I saw her head. She, too, had nothing to protect her from the noise. It wasn't like she needed it anymore, though. I wanted to retch once again, but I kept it down. All I could do was hold it together and try to find Jensen. The barn seemed empty besides Mary, so I headed for the house. Maybe he was in there. Maybe he was still okay. The door had been left ajar there, too. It welcomed me invitingly in, so I stepped inside and gripped my rifle tightly. Something was telling me that I needed the safety off, so I listened. I crept through the house. Maybe I didn't need to. It wasn't as if Jensen would be able to hear me coming. I felt the vibrations from the trumpets through the floor as I stalked inside. Everything appeared normal. Nothing was out of place. No blood staining the floors or man clawing off his own face. I spotted movement out of the corner of my eye as I set foot in the kitchen. Whipping my head around, rifle pointed toward the blur, I saw Jensen crouching in a corner. He was completely naked and curled in on himself, facing the wall, rocking back and forth. I don't know what possessed me to aim at him, my friend and neighbor, but it felt like the only thing to do. I stomped harshly on the floor to get his attention, hoping he would feel it in the wood. Still rocking, he turned his head toward me and stared. Jensen had not mutilated himself. Not yet, at least. All that his face bore was a twisted smile. He turned his naked body around, still crouching, and looked up at me. I adjusted my grip on the rifle and shoved it closer to him, a warning. He didn't seem to care. And just like that, he came flying at me. In an instant, he shot to his feet and barreled straight for me. I had little time to react as he ran straight into the barrel of my gun, knocking it out of my hands and reaching for me. I was screaming at this point, but neither of us heard it. His hands found holds on my shoulders and he grabbed me excruciatingly hard. I felt like I was grinding my teeth down to nubs as I tried to keep it together, tried to push him off of me. His wild, deranged face sat right in front of my own. I could smell his hot breath, feel it as he laughed in my face. Or, I assume he was laughing. It looked just like it, but of course, no sound could be heard. The man had no ear protection on, and I didn't know how he could function enough to attack me without something blocking the noise. We fell to the ground, a naked Jensen on top of me, and began to wrestle. His thumbs dug into my collarbone and I gritted my teeth in pain. My rifle was knocked underneath one of the kitchen counters and out of my grasp, so I had only my body to defend myself. I sent a kick up and into his legs to try to dislodge him, but he just fell against me and kept his hands going. I felt like my collarbone could break at any moment with how hard he was gripping me. I decided my best course of action would be to try to overpower him. With as much strength as I could muster, I rolled my body and managed to flip myself on top of Jensen. He smacked against the floor but seemed entirely unfazed. I struggled to get my hands to his head, but I managed to force past his arms and clasped his skull. His deranged smile hadn't faltered even for a second, and I could still see him laughing at me. Rage had overcome me to a dangerous point, and I knew that it was me or him. With as much guts and strength as I had, I pressed my thumbs into his eyes. I pressed hard, and I didn't stop pressing. He didn't even try to close them as I dug into his skull. His smile remained on his face, teeth glistening up at me. Mouth agape, a laugh jostling his throat. This is how Jensen looked when he died. He didn't die then and there as I loomed over him, thumbs popping his eyes like grapes. Instead, after the deed was done and I was covered in ocular juices and blood, I tore myself away from him and retrieved my rifle. He didn't move, but my guess was that was only because he couldn't see where to go. I raised my rifle and fired a bullet right into his brain. The only thing that I was happy about, being on Jensen and Mary's farm, was the fact that they had a decked-out tornado shelter. Mary had always been the worrisome type, and with them having so many kids for so long, she had convinced Jensen that he needed to put in a shelter strong enough to last them days if the weather grew so terrible, and they got trapped underground. It had been a small idea in the back of my mind as I drove up to their farm that perhaps they would be hiding inside and that I could join them and get away from the trumpets. I didn't even bother to clean my hands when I left. Jensen's naked, beaten body lay on the kitchen floor, brains blown out and eyes non-existent. Mary hung in the rafters of the barn, breeze turning her around. I made my way to their storm shelter and was grateful to find it unlocked. Rifle in hand, I descended into my sanctuary where I would wait out the trumpets. It was quieter down there than it had been anywhere else. I was able to wait a few more hours before the trumpets finally ceased. I almost didn't believe my ears. Carefully, cautiously, I removed the headphones and earbuds and listened to the sound of silence. I went home soon after. I was expecting the cops to come for me in the next few days, but nothing happened. The news said that the death tolls were still being counted, but apparently, a lot of people hadn't made it through the trumpets. They were chalking it all up to a case of mass hysteria, that the trumpets hadn't even been real. Some bozo on Fox suggested that it was the rising rates of mental illness finally rearing its head, or that vaccines had caused people to go crazy. Some said it was Judgment Day. It took a surprisingly short amount of time for it to leave the zeitgeist, though. After a week, no one said a word about the trumpets. I remember it, though. No one talks about it anymore, but I remember. I remember those few minutes when the trumpets first blared, before I had anything to block the noise. I remember this voice in the back of my head telling me, "Wouldn't it be so nice for it to stop?" The rainforest is a lush, living slaughterhouse. The animals want to kill you. The insects want to kill you. Hell, even the humidity wants to kill you. Borneo's air is like breathing molasses. Felt like I was being strangled from the inside out that afternoon, heaving glass jugs filled with river water a mile uphill, while forcing gulps of muddy atmosphere down my throat. I tilted my neck up from the forest floor. Murky sweat dripped down my forehead, curling over my lashes and stinging my eyes. Ahead, sunlight glimmered through tiny slits in a line of tall brush. I spat on a piece of rotting bark, imagining it as Omar's face. He knew I despised water duty. The task was redundant. Dehydrating myself to death's door for a sip of river water in the goddamned rainforest. The irony felt suffocating, but if irony was truly keen on being my killer, it would have to get in line behind everything else. I bounded up the incline and pressed through the brush. Waxy leaves patted my exposed back, welcoming me home. Beautiful, flat earth. The jugs fell from my calloused hands, and I collapsed along the village outskirts. My ankles moaned with relief. Panting like an old steam engine, I rested my face in my palms and let the world go black. A roll of distant thunder muffled the humming of conversation at the nearby marketplace. I sighed. No time to rest. Rain was coming. Rain was always coming. As I lurched to my feet, something small caught my eye, a walnut-sized bud peeking out from the dirt a few inches in front of me. Its tightly twisted petals sported a strange mix of colors. Plum violet with swirls of bronze and scarlet. The sky darkened. Thunder crackled overhead, closer now. I stared at the enigmatic bud, but no genus came to mind. Could something rise from this soil that I truly did not know? The clouds burst like an infected cyst, spewing a deluge. Rain pelted my body. The entire village scrambled to get inside. You know what? Fuck this climate, fuck this village, and most of all, fuck Omar. I sprinted home, drenched clothes slapping an irritating rhythm against my wet skin. Left the water jugs lying in the dirt. I would not be controlled. Thud, thud, thud. I shot upright. My mattress shook. The mosquito net hissed with each violent shudder, shaking free a cascade of startled insects from the hanging mesh. Early morning light streamed in from the cracks in my thatched roof. I slipped on a pair of socks and shoes, pulled the net loose, and rolled out of bed, still slightly drunk from the night before. The drumming of rain and the buzzing of mosquitoes threatened to split my throbbing head in two. Thud, thud, thud. Jesus, I'm coming! I yanked the door open. Our village's de facto leader loomed on my porch, statuesque and grim. The hell's got you riled, Omar? If your stomach's still in knots, I taught you where to pick the tamarind. You need to see something. He reached a meaty paw towards my wrist. I retracted my arm before he could grab it. Don't, I shouted, quickly lowering my voice as his stony eyes narrowed. Just give me a minute. Please. I threw on my poncho and followed Omar into the downpour. By the time we arrived at the village outskirts, the rain had stopped. Our weather was a moody god. The sky was quiet now, sure, but as far as we knew, the next hour might bring a tempest. Easy come, easy go. He led me over to a crowd of laborers, men late for their shift at the palm oil plantation, rendered dumbstruck by what they'd discovered on their way out of the village. Omar's mere presence parted them like Moses and the Red Sea, unveiling the spectacle. My jaw fell slack. The men stood reverent around a familiar purple bud. It had somehow grown to the size of a truck tire overnight. Beads of moisture dripped down 6 massive petals, which furled delicately to a unified apex. I crept closer, past the men, past Omar, close enough to touch it. What is it, Nadia? Any use in letting it grow? He grumbled. I pulled my poncho's hood down to my shoulders and knelt beside the bud. It carried the biologic hallmarks of a corpse flower: the vascularity, the lack of obvious roots or stems, but without its namesake stench. This thing was odorless. It's, well, some sort of corpse flower, I think. A snide chuckle spilled from Omar's stone lips. Helpful. Real helpful, he replied, patting me on the head. Well, I hope you all are satisfied. She doesn't know. Let's prune the damn thing. One of the laborers lifted an axe. The other stepped back, moving out of the trajectory of his incoming swing. Bitter heat swelled in my chest. As the blade descended, I leapt up, shielding the corpse flower with my body. No! Don't! The axe had stopped inches from my shins. An uproar exploded from the laborers. Omar's voice cut through the mayhem. What exactly is your malfunction, hag? It could be very, very valuable. Yells turned to whispers, turned to silence. The laborers looked around the circle, each gaze eventually landing on Omar. Their eyes were wide, hungry, seething with greed's bloodshot shimmer. The flower looks, I don't know, prehistoric? A specimen mainlanders might be willing to, empty their wallets for. The crown jewel of some new museum exhibit. These claims weren't necessarily dishonest, but I was intentionally omitting something. My gut told me this flower was death. I ignored that intuition. If Omar believed it should be excised, it needed to stay. The bastard had to be wrong. His humiliation was the only thing that mattered. Our leader spun around, pivoting his head, taking stock of the voracious stares fixed on him. Really? This thing doesn't strike anyone else as unnatural? Godless? I have faith in Nadia's horticultural insight, but are we really going to jeopardize our safety for something she can't even name? I mean, the bud emitted a faint, fibrous sputter, a sound like thousands of microscopic joints cracking in unison. I turned around. The tips shuddered open. Puffs of yellow mist wheezed from its peeling apex. I held my breath. Death bloomed. 6 petals fell limp, revealing a fleshy center, wet and boiling, black like oil, which emanated a wave of invisible pressure that launched us into the air. My body somersaulted. Screams blipped in and out of focus. Falling, I tucked my knees to my chest. A wall of sulfurous dust erupted from the yawning corpse flower, chasing me through the atmosphere. Grainy friction crawled over my skin, drying my mouth, burning my eyes. Tears streamed down my cheeks. I slammed my lids shut. My flank collided with sodden dirt. Stabbing pain exploded across my left side, reigniting every time my body completed a revolution over the unforgiving ground, again, and again, and again. Gradually, the world slowed to a stop. I tasted hot blood and damp earth. My eyelids creaked open. Clouds gathered overhead. The colors were strange at first. Not black, but brownish gold, with speckles of crimson and mauve. Some of the clouds seemed to blink in and out of existence without warning, there 1 second, gone the next. A hacking cough bubbled up my throat. Small puffs of sun-colored dust spilled from my bleeding lips with every wheeze. The spasms eventually forced my eyes closed. When I was able to look again, all I saw was a black, jagged storm front. Rain was coming. Rain was always coming. "My lord, anybody seriously hurt?" Eli asked, back turned, stirring a pot of soup. "A few broken ribs, some cuts, some bruises, nothing a little gada and beetle leaf wouldn't fix." A burst of lightning flashed through a nearby window, aggravating my concussion, causing my skull to pulse. I massaged the back of my neck. The muscles were like hardening cement under my fingertips, rigid and obstinate. I sniffed. The kitchen smelled of dew and ozone. "What's for dinner? Soup and the corpse flour?" I sighed. "Deceased, sadly. Cleaved at the base and buried by the river. They refused to let me dissect it. A crying shame. Not every day something old and forgotten blossoms like dynamite in front of our eyes." My husband didn't respond. Just kept stirring the pot, clink, clink, clink. He was never the best listener. "All right, well, enjoy your soup, I guess. I'm turning in. Too nauseous to eat anyway." I pushed my chair from the kitchen table, stood, and lumbered into bed, pulling the mosquito net around me. Sleep came easy. Got a few hours of rest before the howling started. You need to understand, Borneo thrives within a ceaseless cacophony. Millions of crickets scrape their spiny legs, blanketing the forest in a harsh, atonal symphony. Geckos yip and bark like lost puppies. Tree frogs call through the darkness, a high-pitched alien melody that can seem to come from everywhere at once. So overwhelmingly vibrant, so incomprehensibly alive, Borneo pulls insanity from the unprepared. After all, insanity drags men deeper into the forest, where they are likely to die, where hungry soil waits to claim their rot. I have slept soundly through thousands of Borneo nights, unbothered. The howling nearly broke me. It started as a distant whistle. My eyes burst open. I laid awake, listening, attempting to rationalize the noise. Was it birdsong? No, it was too consistent. Birdsong is musical. It glides through a scale. This was one continuous note. Piercing. Frayed. Almost metallic sounding. Well, whatever it is, it's far away, I reassured myself. On cue, the noise barreled through the forest at an impossible speed. Barely audible to deafeningly close in less than a second. The pitch seemed to balloon, from shrill and pointed to deep and booming, rattling the walls, shaking the bones within my skin. I tumbled from bed, heart battering my sternum. The mosquito net became tangled around my body. I thrashed against my cocoon, clawing and tearing at the mesh. The howling swirled through the atmosphere. There was unfathomable suffering buried in the noise. I could feel the agony in my marrow. The fabric ripped. I surged onto the floor chest first with a thump. In an instant, the atmosphere cooled. No more whistling, no more howling, just my labored breaths with the pitter-patter of drizzling rain in the background. Borneo had never been quieter. Jittery hands pushed my vibrating body upright. I scuttled backwards, yelping when my shoulders thudded against the bed frame. The invading darkness was thick and blinding. I could barely see a foot in front of me. A crack of lightning split the sky, bleaching my home with brilliant phosphorescence. He'd been there the entire time. Eli was standing across the room, completely still, peering into the forest through an open window. The lightning faded. His silhouette was swallowed by a curtain of night, slowly, gradually, inch by inch. Blinded once more, I felt my heartbeat pulsing in my teeth. "They're outside, Nadia," he said. "Amongst the trees. Watching." His tone was low and matter-of-fact. I couldn't tell if he sounded impossibly far away or uncomfortably close to me. Who? Silence. Pure, unfettered silence. Even the rain was gone. "Eli, who's out there?" Distant thunder bellowed. He spoke again. We need to move further into town. Away from the forest." Heavy footfalls echoed across the floorboards. "Away from the forest." Hinges creaked as the door swung open and shut. "Away from the forest." He kept repeating that phrase as he ran. "Away from the forest, away from the forest, away from forest." A perfect loop that became softer, and then it was gone too, leaving me alone with the watchers in the forest. A few hours passed. I couldn't find the courage to follow Eli, not until the sun rose. With dawn at my back, I laced up my boots, crept out the front door, and began plodding down the dirt road towards village center. The ground squished loudly under my feet. After the howling, ambient sound had not returned to Borneo. The insects, the frogs, the reptiles, they'd all been stricken mute. Shacks grew more clustered along the roadside, but there was no activity, no hustle and bluster of people attending their duties. Had there been a grand exodus? Were they all inside, hiding from something? Halfway there I stopped. There was an old woman looming in the middle of a backyard garden. A watering can hung loosely from her wrist. She had her back to me, facing the forest. Purple orchids and red hibiscus flowers wavered in a gentle wind, brushing against her legs, pleading for her to wake. Did I know her? Couldn't tell. I craned my neck, attempting to determine what the woman was staring at, searching the trees and the canopy for them, the watchers that Eli was so terrified of. There was no movement, just dense overgrowth, same as always. I tiptoed past the inert woman, taking care to hush my breathing. A concrete overcast gathered overhead. Dawn's light dimmed. Nearing the marketplace, I wanted to shout Eli's name, or scream profanity at the storm front, or weep a bevy of convulsive sobs, something, anything. I desperately craved noise. The silence was more suffocating than any amount of humidity. I turned the corner. My guts clenched. They were all there. Hundreds of people, sitting silently in rows of perfect, concentric circles, gazing up at a single focal point, a man. The hems of his robe billowed angelically in the wind. The fabric was dyed the color of an amethyst, bright, seething indigo. He was facing away from me, towards the river, both arms curled in a U shape over his head, palms latched to opposing elbows. A distinctive mound of pale flesh slithered up the back of his neck. I'd recognize the scar anywhere. Omar. A wail soared up my throat. Before it could sail from my lips, someone slapped their hand over my mouth and dragged me back. I flailed, kicking into the dirt, sinking my teeth into the assailant's thick knuckles. They didn't flinch. We rounded the corner. The hypnotized civilians disappeared from sight. "Nadia! For the love of God, quiet down!" a male voice whispered. My eyes bulged from their sockets. It didn't make sense. It wasn't possible. I stopped thrashing. After a moment, they released me. Bile lashed my tonsils. Acid dripped across my tongue. I spun on my heels, turning slowly, fearing the truth, doubting my senses, doubting everything. And yet there he was, waving me forward, statuesque and grim. Omar. Immediately, he seemed to register my panic. "I know. Nadia, please, that's not me." Without breaking eye contact, the man reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a handful of something. The objects rattled in his closed palm, clinking like marbles. "Omar, where's Eli?" As I spoke, he began transferring the objects between his hands. I caught glimpses as they tumbled from palm to palm. They had the glossy, wooden sheen of rosary beads, but they were rounded at the ends, shaped almost like tiny lemons. He furrowed his brow. "Who's Eli?" he started, but in the blink of an eye, his expression snapped to one of recognition. His facial muscles did not move. The change was immediate, instantaneous, impossible. "Oh, Eli? He's back the other way." "No," I muttered, attention darting between Omar and the beads. He curled his lips, leaning back, pressing his closed palms to his stomach. What were these things? Why was he coveting them? And was anything he said the truth? I slinked forward, widening my stance. Figured I'd lunge for his balls or eyes. Incapacitated, potentially maimed, he'd give me the truth. The location of Eli. The beads. I wanted the beads. All of them. The color drained from his face. Omar leapt around and bolted into a nearby alleyway. In his haste, a dozen or so beads slipped from his hands and fell to the earth. I wasted no time collecting my spoils, plucking the burgundy-tinted trinkets from the soil and shoving them in my pocket. I stood tall, puffing my chest, smiling. Thunder crackled overhead. A hacking wheeze erupted from my lips. I bent over, coughing into my hand until the spasms ceased. I lifted my head, groaning. My gaze drifted to my palm. I cocked my head and rotated my wrist. From one angle, my skin appeared coated in a fine yellow dust. At another, my skin seemed clean, dustless. It was like an optical illusion. Phantasmagoria. A cruel, cruel trick. I shot upright. My heart tumbled through my abdomen. Omar was a large man. A veritable behemoth. Why would he run from me? He wouldn't run from me. Body tense, limbs shaking, I slowly peered over my shoulder. They were there. Only feet away. A congregation of human sculptures, hundreds strong, motionless, all but one facing away. The man in the violet robe stood slightly ahead of his parish. The front of his body was concealed behind a smear of bubbling, jet-black liquid. The oil dissolved his skin. His skull was visible through the oil, as were his heaving ribs, as was his thrumming esophagus. A web of lightning flashed through the sky, blinding me. After a second, my vision focused. They were all a few steps closer. I turned and bolted through that same alleyway, headfirst into the overgrowth. Each night, the howling would torment me. The hellish clamor drove me from my hiding places, into the open, where the watchers prowled. I'd bound through the forest, my path guided only by slivers of pale moonlight, and they'd be there. Sometimes a few, sometimes hundreds. Fixed in place. Rooted to the earth. Turned away but in pursuit. Around every corner, waiting for me, always waiting for me. I'd sleep during the day. If I couldn't sleep, if the coughing kept me awake, I'd try to piece my mind back together. Where did this start? Why is it happening? How could I find my way out? Clarity, that word was a beacon. I concentrated on it, kept repeating it in my head. One day it worked. Clarity, clarity, I need clarity. What helps with clarity? Gotu kola is good. Turmeric and tonkat ali are better. I found turmeric first. Yanked a waxy stem from the ground, revealing a cluster of yellow-brown bulbs. Ecstatic, I reached out and grabbed the roots. My elation faded. It didn't feel right. Turmeric is firm, moist, and sticky on the inside. These roots felt limp and parched, yet, when I looked, my hands were stained golden yellow, exactly as they should be. Why? The corpse flower was toying with me. For whatever reason, I could trust my hands, but not my eyes. It was a grueling process, fumbling around the jungle floor, guided only by the feel of my home's soil and the things that grew from it. But eventually I had what I needed. Somehow, the medicine worked. Little by little, the howling vanished, and the watchers disappeared. A week later, I returned to my village to bear witness to my people's end. Outside the marketplace, their rotting bodies were arranged in concentric circles, faces to the dirt, tethered to the still living corpse flower through a vast network of black, fleshy roots. I dug up the hole where we believed we buried the damn thing, only to find Omar's decomposing head, his scar still vaguely appreciable. An optical illusion. A cruel, cruel trick. Without ceremony, I burned it all to the ground. A beautiful, cleansing fire, liberating the souls of my people, torching that hellish thing, roots and all. Watching it all burn, feeling the heat in the air, I experienced something odd. I had a tough time putting a name to it initially, but I think I figured it out. Pride. A feeling of pride bloomed in my chest. Above all, I would not be controlled. I'm on a bus to the mainland now. Sorrow hangs heavy in my heart, but all things considered, I'm optimistic. You see, all isn't lost. Turns out Eli survived as well. He's sitting a few seats ahead, facing away from me, eyes glued on what will be our new home soil. My cough remains, sure. I won't deny it's painful. Whenever the pain becomes too great, though, I just thumb the beads in my pocket. They're warm to the touch. That warmth calms me. It's a reminder of my pride. I think I'll bury them when we get there. Seeds to start our new, radiant life. Our life away from the forest. Away from the forest. Away from the forest. Away from the forest. You see, I'm quite ill. So ill that my husband has hired an entire staff to tend to me in the house, because there is so much I cannot do anymore. Every morning, one of my attendants wakes me up and brings me my breakfast. And my medication. So many pills that I have to take, but they do seem to help. Sometimes I can sit up in my bed and feed myself, though my hands shake terribly and my muscles are so stiff. Other times, my attendant must sit with me and feed me like I am an infant. It used to be embarrassing, when I first started needing so much extra help, but I have become accustomed to it. I'm grateful for my attendants, and everything they do for me. After breakfast, the children usually come visit me in my room. My beautiful angels, all with their halos of golden curls and their sparkling blue eyes. They run about the room, laughing and playing chase, jumping on my bed and leaping to the floor. I never caution them or tell them to stop, because it warms my heart to see them having so much fun. I have 3 babies, and they will always be my babies no matter how much time passes. My oldest, Jocelyn, is 8. She is starting to look so much like me, I think, with her sharp, pointed nose and her delicate brows, always furrowed in thought. Her cheeks are starting to lose the chubbiness of childhood, and my heart aches to see her growing up so fast. Simon is my middle child and my only boy, and what a boy he is. Wild, unbothered by the rules my husband and I tried to enforce so many times over the years. He has my full, pouty lips, and I can tell that when he is older, he will have his father's strong brow and jawline, and he's only 6 years old. He looks to me like a Greek carving out of marble, with the hard lines of his bone structure that are still so softened by the babbishness of his features. But even he looks so grown up to me now. My youngest is Evelyn, and she is only 3. She has such a sweet, cherubic little face, with her impossibly long eyelashes and her rosy, chubby cheeks. She cannot run as fast or jump as high as her siblings, but she tags along as quickly as her little legs will carry her. She still cuddles with me the most, curling up next to me in my arms when I take my naps before lunch. The sweet smell of her hair fills my nose and sends me off to sleep so peacefully. When the children aren't tearing around my room like whirling dervishes, they often go out to play in the garden. Jocelyn and Simon are always so gentle with Evelyn and always make sure to wait for her to catch up. I'm so lucky to have such sweet babies who love each other so much. I used to be able to join them in the garden, before I got sick, and sometimes it makes me sad that I'm stuck inside, in my room. I have a rotating cast of attendants who stay with me each day. Understandably so, since I imagine that they all have families to get home to once their shifts caring for me are done. My husband has insisted I have care around the clock, so I have 3 different attendants each day for each shift: morning, evening, and overnight. My attendants help me shower every morning and help me get dressed each day. It means so much to be able to wear clean, fresh clothes every day and not rot away in bed wearing the same gown for days on end. Tiffany, who is one of my favorites, will brush out my long hair and do it up in a lovely French braid for me. I only see her twice a week, though, and the other attendants don't seem to want to bother with my hair. It can become quite tangled by the time Tiffany comes again, and she will spend so much time patiently and gently teasing the knots from my hair. Sometimes she'll murmur as she combs and braids, "Miss Margaret, where are those beautiful babies of yours?" I always tell her they must be elsewhere in the house, perhaps playing with their dollhouse or sprawled in the playroom reading books. Tiffany always clicks her tongue and doesn't say anything to that. Of course, in addition to my attendants, I have my doctors. Dr. Phillips is a tall, thin man with graying hair cropped close, and big, thick-framed black glasses that always look precariously close to sliding right off the end of his long nose. Dr. Phillips comes to see me every day after lunch to check on me and ask me how I'm feeling. He usually gets the same answer from me every day. Dr. Wilcox, who told me that I can call her Jennifer, is a doctor for my feelings. That's how she explained it to me when we first met. She said that being so sick can bring up all kinds of negative feelings, and she wanted me to feel comfortable sharing with her if there was anything I was struggling with. She never makes much headway with me. I'm always too tired after talking to Dr. Phillips to answer any of her questions. Sometimes I do answer her questions and she gives me a peculiar look and jots things down in her notebook. I don't know what she does with that notebook after she leaves my room, but I think I'd like to read it someday. Everyone who cares for me wears a uniform. I guess it is mandatory for the agency that my husband hired them from. The only person who comes to see me who never wears a uniform is my friend, Allison. Allison always brings her dog, Fig, who is a huge, auburn-colored golden retriever. The first time I met Allison and Fig, I could tell Allison was a little apprehensive. She held Fig's leash tightly in her fist, though you wouldn't guess it from how the leash dangled with plenty of slack. But I noticed these things. Allison said something under her breath to one of my attendants as Fig approached me in my chair. The dog walked right up to me and placed her giant, blocky head right in my lap, looking up at me with her soft brown eyes. I lifted a hand and gently patted her head, and then scratched behind her ears, and she closed her eyes and let the full weight of her head settle against my leg. I saw Allison's grip on the leash relax, and I heard her quietly mutter, "Figgy is a great judge of character." To my attendant, who shrugged his shoulders and then looked away, almost irritated. After that first meeting, Allison has brought Fig to visit me every week. If I'm in bed, Fig will jump up and lie beside me, warming me with her silken auburn fur. Allison will always pull up a chair and sit next to me, and she always makes small talk about the weather or tells me a funny story about what Figgy has gotten up to since the last time we met. Allison even reaches out and holds my hand sometimes, and gives me a knowing look. She once asked me why I'm sick, and I told her it was better for both of us if she didn't know. But that didn't scare her away. One day, that same attendant, who was there during my first meeting with Allison and Fig, pulled up a chair rather closer to me and Allison than he normally would, and opened up a newspaper to read. The big headline on the front read, "Father of children missing for 3 years petitions to have them officially declared dead." A sad story, to be sure. A picture of the father with his children, all beaming at the camera, took up most of the front page. My husband has to travel so much for work that he is rarely able to visit with me. When he does, he often meets with my doctors and they discuss things in hushed tones. I catch snippets as they speak. "No progress, no new information, different medication." My husband has control over my treatment because my illness often makes me too tired and disoriented to be able to consent to any changes. My husband has learned only to come visit me before 5 p.m., because there have been one too many visits after dinner when he had come into my room to see me and something awful has come over me and I have attacked him. Lunged out of my bed or my wheelchair with my hands outstretched, clawing for his throat and eyes as my attendant springs into action to restrain me. Whenever this has happened, my husband refuses to meet my eyes with his, afraid to look at me and acknowledge the real reason why I want to kill him, a reason only he and I will ever know. You see, my morning medications really start to wear off after dinner, and I can't have my evening doses until 7 p.m. As the afternoon turns to evening, I feel my symptoms start to come back. My vision, blurry and unfocused during the day, becomes sharper. The golden light that bathes everything darkens and becomes cold and blue, throwing everything into harsh relief and making my surroundings feel unwelcoming and clinical. My head, so foggy and sluggish all day, begins to clear, and my memories start to come back. I see my attendants for what they really are, employees begrudgingly tasked with watching over me, rather than dedicated and compassionate caregivers. The worst, though, is my children. When they come to visit me after dinner, they no longer look happy and angelic and full of life and laughter. They no longer look the way I want to remember them. Instead, they look the way I am forced to remember them. Jocelyn's scalp is half ripped away from her skull and her left eye is missing. Blood stains her nose and mouth, and she has thick purple bruising around her neck. Her head hangs at an odd angle, and her legs can only shuffle her forward as she tries to walk on compound fractures with shards of bone piercing her skin. The entire left side of Simon's head has been completely caved in, and he spits and sputters bubbles of blood as he struggles to draw in ragged breaths. His rib cage is crushed and splintered, and his lungs flap uselessly against his chest wall. And Evelyn, my poor, sweet baby girl, too young to even understand what was happening to her. Her eyes are black, filled completely with dead blood. Her tongue is huge and purple and protrudes from her mouth. She, too, bears thick bruising around her neck, although this is barely noticeable due to the fact that she now carries her head in her tiny little hands because it was ripped completely from her shoulders. They all come to me and stare at me, crying, "Why, Mama?" It used to drive me mad at first, and more often than not when they showed up to haunt me, I would claw so deeply at my arms as I screamed in anguish that I ended up bound to my bed in padded restraints while a nurse administered an injection to put me to sleep. Now, I just cry silently. I don't look away, because my babies deserve to be seen, but my heart shatters into a million pieces over and over again every night when they come to remind me of what I've done. A trucker found me on the side of the highway 3 years ago, covered in blood, some of it mine, some of it not. At the emergency room, they tried to get me to tell them what happened to me, but I couldn't. All I could do was scream as I pictured my babies the way I left them before I escaped into the woods. I think I hoped to get lost and die of exposure out there, but instead I stumbled out onto the roadway and nearly got hit by a truck. Dying that way would have been better than I deserved. When the police showed up to question me, the emergency room staff were confused. But then the detective explained. My husband had reported the children, and me, missing that morning, after waking up to find the house empty. He told the police that I hadn't been well lately, hadn't been taking my medications, and he was worried that I may have harmed the children. The police knew as much when they saw me on that gurney, covered in my children's blood. And I couldn't speak to tell them what had happened. They finally sedated me to get me to stop screaming, and when I woke up I was handcuffed to the bed rail and a cop sat in the corner of my room, staring me down. They took me to court, but I was found to be incompetent to stand trial. The state psychologist who examined me determined that I had entered a catatonic state and that, in my stupor, I was incapable of understanding the charges being brought against me. And that's how I ended up here at Willow Grove, the highest security forensic psychiatric hospital in the state. imprisoned amongst others deemed incompetent to stand trial, like me, or those who were found not criminally responsible, which is the technical term for not guilty by reason of insanity. And here I've stayed for the past 3 years, under a constant fog of antipsychotics and benzodiazepines, unable to tell anyone what really happened the night that I was found. Unable to tell anyone the real reason I have attacked my husband so many times, the reason that only he and I will ever know. Because it wasn't me who hurt my precious babies that night in the woods. We hadn't seen Matt for weeks. At the company, everyone thought he had moved away, or that his sister's condition had gotten worse. Even our boss knew nothing, and nobody could reach him. I figured he would at least send a message. After 9 years of friendship, I didn't think he'd just vanish without a word. That's why I was so shocked when he walked into our usual bar on Friday night. He was genuinely happy to see me, and I was stunned. I thought maybe he wasn't even alive anymore. We talked for a long time that night. Matt looked a bit tired, but he was still cheerful, full of life, the same eccentric, funny guy as always. We stayed there until closing time. Since I didn't have any plans for the weekend, Matt invited me over to his place. I'd been there a few times before. His apartment had always been tidy, sometimes even the site of small parties. He used to invite a few coworkers too, the ones he actually liked. But when he opened the door this time, I was completely shocked by what I saw. A foul stench hit me right away. Piles of garbage bags stood in heaps. The kitchen looked like a war zone. Dirty dishes, leftover food, and rotting scraps were everywhere. Matt? I stopped in my tracks as he opened the door. Are you sure everything's okay? Of course. Why, Dan? Matt shot back instantly. I gestured around the entryway, pointing out that the whole place was a wreck. Just haven't had time to clean up, he said cheerfully with a wave. Come on, let's have a beer. Matt shoved some trash out of the way in the kitchen and tried to open the fridge, but a big garbage bag and a couple of boxes blocked the door. Oh, Dan, just give me a sec, he groaned as he wrestled with it. Go ahead, make yourself comfortable in the living room. I'll be right there. Reluctantly, I agreed to leave him in the filthy kitchen. Carefully, I squeezed down the narrow hallway, stepping around the reeking trash bags and boxes. By the time I reached the doorway to the living room, I heard a loud clatter from the kitchen, followed by some cursing and Matt shouting that everything was fine. A little tense, I stepped out of the garbage-strewn hall and into the living room, and froze. It was like crossing an invisible line. The living room was spotless, neatly arranged, and even smelled fresh. The furniture gleamed as if it had just been cleaned. Maybe Matt hadn't been lying. Maybe he really was fine after all. Then my feet rooted to the floor. Someone was sitting in one of Matt's armchairs. A figure wrapped in a white robe. I couldn't see its face because it was bowed low, and the long robe covered it completely from head to toe. Only its hands were visible, long, yellowish nails, ragged and chewed down. It sat there like a king on a throne, its disgusting hands resting on the armrests. I just stood there, speechless. What's wrong? Came Matt's voice from behind me. I turned, startled. Who the hell is that? I asked in disbelief. Oh, don't look at me like that, Matt said cheerfully, handing me a bottle of beer. That's just my roommate. Your roommate? Since when do you have a roommate? I asked, still frozen in the doorway. Not long, he replied, pushing past me into the room. Come on, Dan, sit down with us. An uncomfortable silence settled over the living room. Matt sprawled across the couch, sipping his beer, while the strange figure sat motionless in the armchair, almost triumphant in its stillness. I, on the other hand, was busy looking for a way out. No matter how hard Matt insisted that I sit down, I told him I'd been sitting enough at the office all week and preferred to stand. I started pacing the room. "So, how've you been, Dan?" Matt asked, taking a swig from his bottle. "Well," I answered nervously, my eyes fixed on an old photo on his shelf. "I'm fine, really. Everything's pretty much the same." The suffocating silence returned. The easy, cheerful tone we'd had back at the bar was gone. We sat there awkwardly, three strangers trapped in the same room. Matt," I finally gathered my courage. "I think I should get going. I've got something to do tomorrow." "At the bar you said you didn't have anything to do tomorrow." Matt shot back immediately. "Oh, right," I stammered. "Yeah, it just came to me." Matt took another drink, his eyes narrowing as he stared at me. I stuttered nervously. "I really should get going." He sighed heavily, set his beer down on the little coffee table, and looked straight at me, his face suddenly cold. "Dan, what's wrong?" he asked flatly. I glanced around, tense and uneasy. Every instinct in me screamed to bolt for the door and never look back. "Matt," I said at last. "It's just, this whole situation's a little weird. The mess out there, and everything." Matt looked confused, as if he hadn't even noticed the state of his own apartment. The thought flashed through my mind, maybe his so-called roommate didn't notice it either. "And," I said more quietly, "there's that guy." "I told you, he's my roommate," Matt replied sharply. "When he wakes up, I'll introduce you." "He's sleeping?" I asked, glancing nervously at the hooded figure. "Whatever. Matt, I need to go." "I'm sorry, but I can't do this." I turned toward the hallway. But I only managed a few steps. Matt was ready for it. He jumped up, grabbed something from beneath a couch cushion, and before I could react, he smashed a wrench across my face. Blood sprayed from my nose, splattering the wall. 2 teeth shattered. It happened in an instant. I was already on the floor. The world spun. Warm, metallic blood trickled down my face. "Dan," I heard Matt's muffled voice. "I'm sorry. Dan, this is the angel's request." I came to, disoriented and dazed. The harsh light bouncing off the white tiles stabbed at my eyes. I blinked hard, trying to clear my vision and my mind. "Dan," Matt's voice echoed, distant and muffled, as if it came from far away. "Dan, I'm sorry. But I have to do this." I tried to lift my head, but I could barely move. Blood dripped from my mouth and nose in slow, heavy drops. That's when I realized my hands were tied. My vision gradually cleared. Matt was sitting on the edge of the bathtub in front of me. I was bound to the radiator. But the worst part wasn't him. It was the figure standing in the doorway. The white robe covered its entire body. The hood hung so low that its face was completely hidden. Only a wrinkled, dark red neck was visible, like it had been smeared with some kind of dye. The skin looked old, ancient, human and not human at the same time. Its feet were concealed under the robe, and its hands were tucked inside the sleeves. "Dan," Matt started again. "Do you know the Christian Bible?" I looked at him. When I moved my head, I felt the wound in my nose reopen, and warm blood began to trickle again. I stared into his eyes, angry, terrified, and yet more furious than afraid. How could an old friend do this to me? "So you don't," Matt said when I didn't answer. "Then let me tell you a story. Abraham's story." I didn't look away from him. The hatred inside me burned like fire. How could I have been stupid enough to walk right into his trap? Matt glanced toward the figure in the doorway. It hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound. "I see," Matt said to it quietly, as if listening to an order only he could hear. "Then I'll do it your way." He stood up from the edge of the tub and stepped closer to me. "Dan, Abraham was willing to sacrifice his own son," he said coldly. "It was a test of faith. But tell me, did Abraham receive anything in return for his obedience? I said nothing. I didn't understand what he was talking about, where this was going, or when he had turned into a religious maniac. You don't know the answer either, do you? Matt said softly. But I was chosen. I've been given my reward. What the hell are you talking about? I growled, spitting a thick, bloody wad onto the floor. Abigail's better, Matt said sternly. She might even be released from the hospital soon. My eyes widened. Abigail, Matt's sister. She'd been fighting cancer for years. The last time we talked at the office, he told me her chances weren't good. Now, after a few weeks, she's suddenly recovering? The religious talk was strange enough, but this was insane. Dan, Matt said again, pausing for effect. It's because of the angel. I brought him offerings. Matt! I shouted, realization cutting through the fog in my head. You're insane! Quiet! He barked. I have proof. My sister's healing. All I had to do was offer simple sacrifices to God and his angel. Simple? I roared back. Killing a person is simple? I haven't killed anyone, he said nervously. Only food, animals. That's different. For God's sake, Matt! I screamed. Then why the hell are you trying to kill me? I'm not trying to kill you, he said softly, glancing again at the white-hooded figure. This is Abraham's story, Dan. You don't have to be afraid. Then he smiled at me, gentle, almost kind. As if I wasn't tied to a radiator, waiting to die. Matt and the strange figure had left me alone. He said he was going to prepare the altar. He'd completely lost his mind. There was no other explanation. And that white-robed thing, it wasn't his priest. Hell, I wasn't even sure it was human. I had to escape before I became the sacrificial lamb. I pulled at the pipe of the radiator, trying to tear loose the rope around my wrists, but it wouldn't budge. Dan, what are you doing? Matt's calm voice came from the doorway. He stood there, watching me struggle with the pipe. In his hand was the same wrench he'd used to knock me out. I let go of the pipe and raised my bound hands as much as I could, surrendering. Matt walked toward me slowly. His movements were calm, natural, like he was getting ready for a weekend cookout, not for a sacrifice. He untied the knot and pulled me to my feet. My hands were still bound, but at least I was free, and I didn't waste the chance. I shoved him hard. He fell backward into the tub, and I bolted for the door like a frightened rabbit. But just as I reached the living room and turned toward the hallway, the door slammed shut in front of me. It sounded like a gust of wind had blown it closed. I grabbed the handle and yanked at it, but it wouldn't move. The handle itself refused to turn. When I turned back, Matt was already climbing out of the bathtub, and the hooded figure had emerged from the living room. For a brief moment I saw inside, and I knew instantly I'd rather die than go in there. The walls were painted red, probably with blood. Candles burned everywhere, and what looked like animal parts hung from the ceiling. But what mattered most was the sight of my bag on the couch. My phone was inside. I always kept it there. With one quick leap I reached the bag and grabbed the phone. Matt was still staggering out of the bathroom, clutching his head. The white-robed figure did nothing. It simply stood in the doorway, the hem of its robe floating slightly, as if stirred by a breeze. When Matt started toward me, he suddenly froze. It was as if the hooded thing was speaking to him, but I couldn't hear a word. I dialed 911, barely managing to speak before I heard footsteps pounding toward me. It was Matt, charging at me with some kind of strange knife. I couldn't say much into the phone, but I hoped the shouting and struggle would be enough to send someone. Matt slashed at me, the blade sinking into my arm. I screamed in pain and kicked him as hard as I could between the legs. He stumbled back, groaning. He yanked the knife from my arm, and I ran, this time toward the kitchen. But Matt recovered quickly and came at me again. We crashed into the small cabinet by the window, then tumbled to the floor. He grabbed me and punched me hard in the face. I felt something crack in my nose, and blood sprayed across the floor. Then he started hitting me over and over, my head, my ribs, my chest, each blow landing heavier than the last. "Don't you get it, Dan?" he screamed. "God would have saved you at the last second." I could only gurgle blood. My face was a mess, every hit sending flashes of light through my skull. Matt got to his feet, wiping the sweat from his brow, looking around for the knife he'd dropped. "God damn it, Dan!" he shouted. "When I walked into that damn bar and saw you, I knew it was his will. I knew you were there to help me. Why do you have to make this so fucking hard?" He found the knife, picked it up, and kicked me again, hard. I was barely conscious. Blood poured from my face and my torn arm. He grabbed me by the legs and started dragging me back toward the living room, across the floor. Through my blurry vision, I saw my phone still glowing on the ground, the emergency line still open. "Help!" I gasped, as loudly as I could when I got close to it. "Help me! God!" Matt screamed. "God and his angels! They're the only ones who can help. Don't you see, Dan? The angel is here. He's here, living with me." He dragged me into the bedroom, thick with the stench of rot, and kicked me again before letting go. The white hooded figure was in the room, or maybe floating, I couldn't tell anymore. My mind was slipping, my vision gone, my only thought begging inside my head, "I don't want to die here." Matt raised the knife high above me. "And now God will save you," he said, and brought it down. A searing pain tore through my side. I screamed, a broken, gasping sound that barely left my throat, but loud enough for God, maybe, to hear. Because a sound came next, from outside. The door burst open. Matt roared, charging out of the room, the knife in his hand. Gunshots echoed. I stared at the sheep's head nailed to the wall. For some reason, my fading mind wondered where he'd even found it. There were no sheep in this city. I heard the cops entering, shouting, calling for an ambulance. One of them knelt beside me, pressing hard on my wound, trying to stop the bleeding. His voice was calm, but I could tell he was terrified. I could barely move my head, but I managed to nod weakly. He shouted something to his partner and ran out. That's when I saw it, the edge of a white robe drifting into view. Its hem was dirty, caked with mud. And behind it, the legs. Even through the haze, they horrified me. They weren't human. They looked like the legs of a massive goat, black hooves clicking softly on the wooden floor. "We'll meet again," the white hooded figure whispered, leaning close to my ear. The stench hit me, a choking mix of blood, decay, and something ancient. Somewhere deep in my fading mind, I knew this thing was the cause of everything. "Until then," it said softly, "take care of yourself, little lamb." And I blacked out. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. Everyone was shocked. No one had imagined Matt could lose his mind like that. The police said they hadn't found anyone else in the apartment. Even after I told them everything. They claimed my mind must have broken under the trauma. But I remember the figure in the white robe. The stench that came from it. And its legs. And I know one thing for certain, it wasn't an angel. Darkness swiftly stretched across the snowbound landscape, held only at bay by the spaced-out streetlights flashing by in a low-frequency blink. I sat in the front passenger seat, my eyes glued lazily to the window as I barely held on to my waking thoughts in a mix of monotony and comfortable boredom. In the cup holder sat a long-since-cold cup of coffee my dad had bought a few towns over in a foolish attempt at staying alert. We'd already been driving for 12 hours. and we'd be driving throughout the night till the early morning hours to reach our destination in one go, managing to avoid spending money on a motel. My dad was stubborn like that, only willing to cash out on services he deemed necessary. Comfort was a luxury. Had it still been warm outside, he'd have insisted on sleeping in the car, knowing fully well that he'd wake up to an aching back. Arguing this point to him would, of course, have been a futile task. I turned in my seat, momentarily dozing off. I'd always loved the feeling of sleeping in a moving car only to wake up at an entirely new destination. It held an odd sense of peace and comfort to let my dad take care of the journey, as if nothing bad could happen whenever he was in control. I listened to the whirring sounds of the engine, and the radio faintly playing a segment of the mystery show, Unheard, recounting the story of the Baikonur missing cosmonauts of 1993. A mild bump in the road then shook me awake, signaling that we'd made it past the city to once again drive across endless country roads, through fields and forests. The street lamps that had illuminated the path ahead were gone, leaving us with nothing but our car's high beams to lead the way. The farmers' fields were quickly replaced by dense forests on each side of the road, glistening snow covering each branch, glittering in the dark night. A small, makeshift parking bay appeared a little way up ahead. My dad pulled into it, putting the car in park as he announced that he needed to take a leak, an urge I shared after driving non-stop for the past 7 hours since our last stop. We took a few steps into the woods, forming fresh footprints in the thus far untouched snow, and stood side by side separated by a tree as we took care of business. A frisk breeze shot through the trees, unsettling snow in the trees above, which subsequently came pummeling down onto my head, slipping in under my jacket as the snow quickly melted against my skin. My dad let out a chuckle, to which I responded with a freshly formed snowball tossed towards his head. A quick, but hectic snowball fight ensued, ending with a decisive victory in my favor, though I suspected my dad had let me win. By the time we returned to the car, the skies above had turned overcast with a thick layer of dark clouds. Specks of white appeared before us, signaling that the clouds had already decided to let their first snowflakes fall down to the ground. "Storm's coming," my dad stated matter-of-factly as if he had hidden foresight. "We better get going before it starts." No sooner had we gotten back on the road than the few flakes had turned into heavy, but direct snowfall. Though the roads had been cleared a couple of days prior, it wouldn't take long for the asphalt to turn into a slippery mess. Still, we kept pushing, knowing better than to let ourselves get snowed in here in the middle of nowhere. The wind picked up, shooting white specks of snow towards our windshield, lowering our visibility to near zero. We slowed down, desperately trying to keep the road in sight. Minutes passed, and the path ahead quickly faded away into a white sheet. We were left no choice but to slow down to a crawl. Even then, we'd hit the edge of the road, barely able to swerve back onto the slippery asphalt. "We should stop," I begged. "If we stop here, we ain't going to be able to get moving again," my dad argued. But it wouldn't matter, because before we could get a chance to argue about our predicament, we came to a gliding halt as the snow ahead had piled up to levels far exceeding what our car could traverse. "Fuck!" my dad yelled out of frustration before quickly catching himself. "Sorry, didn't mean to say that." But the damage had already been done. My dad was a stoic man, never resorting to profanity unless reaching his absolute limit. With a single word, he'd let it slip that he was no longer in control, and that fact terrified me more than anything that could have happened on the road. "We should turn around," I suggested, worry clearly present in my voice. "It's no use. The roads aren't going to get better in the other direction either. We're in too deep." He pulled his cell phone out of the glove compartment and turned it on a hopeless effort at calling for help. But this far away from the nearest city, we were out of luck. There wasn't a single bar of signal to reach civilization. "What are we going to do?" I asked. "It's going to be all right," he said as reassuringly as he could. "Your grandparents know we're coming. Once they realize we're not there, They'll know we're stuck on the road. They'll send someone, I'm sure of it." "How do you know?" I asked, not demanding an explanation, but further reassurance. "Trust me, I've known your grandparents a lot longer than you have. We'll be fine as long we make it through the night. But it's going to be cold, so I'm going to need you to get dressed, alright?" His trademark confidence calmed me down a little. After all the stories he told me about the perils he'd endured, surely he'd know how to keep us safe. I did as my dad had ordered and put on several layers of clothes taken out of my suitcase in the trunk. Though we had little in terms of supplies, there were enough snacks back there to keep us satiated through the night. I dug through the luggage, the presents for my grandparents, and carefully put aside my dad's prized hunting rifle. "Don't worry. If we get stuck here for more than a day, I'll go hunt something for us to eat," he joked. "But we're going to be out of here by tomorrow. We just have to stay put until someone comes to get us." We turned the car off, still kept warm by the residual heat that dissipated minute by minute. Even our presence within the car cabin alone kept the heat trapped inside, if only for a short time. I tried to sleep, hoping that the roads would clear up during my slumber, allowing me to wake up in a completely new location as I had first anticipated. My dad, stubborn as he was, would stay awake, intermittently checking his phone in case a signal could get through. Whenever the temperature dropped too low and I so much as shivered, he'd restart the engine just for long enough to heat up the car, keeping a close look at the fuel gauge. Despite our troubling predicament, I once again felt safe in his presence, enough so that I managed to fall into a deep sleep full of bizarre dreams about forest giants and snow trolls, triggered by the sounds of howling wind and snow pounding against our car. I awoke again to my dad opening the driver's seat door to get outside. He turned to me, shovel in hand. "Stay put, I am just going to clear the exhaust pipe," he explained. The door had only been open for all of 7 seconds, but it had been enough to drastically drop the temperature inside. He held up a flashlight to assess our situation, its beam prominently displayed by the incessant snowfall, though only able to penetrate it for all of 5 feet. He got to work slowly clearing the exhaust pipe of snow, stopping us from getting suffocated by the carbon monoxide gas. But it wouldn't he clear the road, and within a couple of hours, he'd have to clear the way again. He then cleared a narrow path between the growing layer of snow and the passenger seat door, allowing both of us to quickly get out of the car in case we needed to leave. Once the job had been done, he got back into the car and started the engine to once again heat up the interior. His hands shivered from the cold, and he looked worried, though he'd never admit to such. He again ordered me to try to get some rest while he stayed awake to make sure that we wouldn't get buried in the snow. Again, I fell to slumber, though it had turned to an uneasy one as I had started to notice that even my dad might not be equipped to keep us safe overnight. Then the door opened once more. Only an hour had passed that time, and yet again my dad needed to get out to clear the exhaust pipe, car roof, and doors. It took more time then, both due to exhaustion and due to worsening weather conditions. I kept my eyes and ears peeled, praying silently that someone might already come to our rescue. The road ahead, now completely invisible under the snow, remained dark. The howling wind had picked up, and apart from the scraping of my dad's shovel and thumps of tossed snow, there was nothing else to be heard. But then we heard something. Faint at first, barely cutting through the storm, but definitely a contrast to the monotonous cacophony we'd suffered under so far. I contemplated opening my door to get a better listen, but before I could make that decision, my dad jumped back into the car and told me to stay quiet. He looked pale as a sheet. It wasn't just from the cold. There was something else subtly present in his eyes, utter terror. "What was that?" "Quiet!" he whispered aggressively without explaining what he'd heard. I froze in place, my eyes fixed on the storm before us. My heart pounded, but I kept focused, trying to hear the sound again. "Please help me!" A desperate voice called out through the storm, impossibly loud. but it differed from the sound I'd heard before. Though I couldn't precisely place it, I knew it hadn't been a voice. It once again prompted my dad to get out of the vehicle. His fear turned to determination to save whoever else might be trapped in the storm with us. "Hello, is there anyone out there?" he called as he waves his flashlight back and forth as if to signal any lost souls on the road. "Stop it, please!" the voice called out, getting even closer. That time it sounded different, like it had come from a different person. It was distorted by the storm, making it impossible to discern whether it came from a man or woman. "Where are you?" Dad called out again. "Help me!" the voice repeated, not acknowledging our presence, sounding even stranger than it had before. "I can see you. Just follow the light," he went on, still waving his flashlight around. "Oh God, no!" the voice went on, even closer then. Something was wrong, though I couldn't explain what. I could feel it deep inside me. Whatever had called for help had awoken a primal instinct within me, one I hadn't felt that far during my 11 years of life, and it was telling me to run. "Dad, get back in the car!" I pleaded, but he had stepped too far away from the car. He couldn't hear me. I opened the passenger side door and stepped outside, calling for my dad once more. In the distance I could just barely see his flashlight waving through the air. "Help me!" the voice called outside, jarring and unnaturally loud. It didn't even attempt to sound human anymore. "Over here!" my dad responded. "Dad, come back!" Then, as if a switch had been flicked, the pleas for help turned to a relentless, ear-shattering scream. It sounded as if it came from above us, from something too tall to ever be considered human. I cried out for my dad once more, but he didn't respond. "Dad, please!" I begged. The beam of his flashlight hung still in the air for a moment, before suddenly starting to spin as if the flashlight had been tossed. Worried that my dad might have been taken by the creature, I prepared to set off and chase after him. But no sooner had I taken one step into the darkness than something pulled me back into the car. "Close the door," my dad ordered. I did as commanded and closed and locked the door. "What happened?" "Shh!" Using his hands, he gestured for me to stay low. He turned off the headlights and everything inside the car, plunging us into absolute darkness. We lay there for minutes, listening intently for signs of life outside. Once I just started to believe that the coast might be clear, the silence was shattered by another guttural scream that sent shivers down my spine. I dug myself deeper into the seat, hoping it might somehow keep me safe from whichever horrors were to come, but against all odds, whatever lurked outside didn't seem to know where we were. "What is it?" I whispered. "I don't know," my dad whispered back. "Just try to stay quiet." The interior of the car remained completely dark except for a small digital clock on the dashboard that stated that we'd just made it past 3 in the morning. Even if we survived until the break of day, it would take hours for anyone to realize we were gone, much less find us, and attempting to flee on foot would undoubtedly lead to our deaths either by the environment or by the monster outside. With no other option, we remained hidden inside the car, counting the minutes as the snow continued to bury us. Unable to use the car's engine to heat up the car lest we alert the monster, the temperature slowly sank to below 0. Even if we weren't found by the monster, we might not survive the cold. My dad wrapped his arms around me in an attempt at keeping me warm, but at that point I doubted he could feel his arms anymore. "It's going to be okay, Matty. I promise," he whispered. "I'll get us out of here." The screaming persisted throughout the next couple of hours, getting closer at first, but always going in the wrong direction, circling us again and again. At that point, our car was covered in a layer of snow deep enough so that the monster could only find us if he stepped directly on top of us. As the morning hours neared, the storm also appeared to have calmed, but the temperatures had dropped to depths cold enough that should we fall asleep, we might not wake up again. Despite the fear I felt, my body was about to shut down. No matter how much I tried to fight it, I was just lingering on the brink of consciousness. "Hey, Maddie, stay awake," my dad whispered as he shook me. "I'm so cold," I stuttered in an exhausted response. Another scream could be heard in the distance, a bit further away that time. This was the only chance we would get. If we didn't act fast, the cold would kill us before the monster did. "We're going to have to warm up the car, but I need to clear the exhaust pipe again, okay?" With both doors trapped behind piles of snow, my dad opted to crawl to the back of the car, guided only by the lights of the dimmest of courtesy lamps, and opened the trunk from inside. Since it would open upwards, he might be able to get enough leverage to push it against the snow covering the top. He crawled over the suitcases, holding onto the shovel. He then paused for a moment, his gaze lingering on the hunting rifle. Not knowing what we were up against, we had no way of knowing the rifle would be powerful enough to serve as means of defense. But should it come to a direct confrontation, we didn't have any other viable options. He loaded the rifle while lying flat inside the car and put it to the side for easy access as he pushed the trunk open. He then proceeded to dig out as much snow as he could without standing up tall enough to be discovered by the creature. Once the exhaust had been cleared, he grabbed onto the rifle and signaled for me to turn on the engine. The lights had already been turned to their off position, but even though the car wouldn't light up significantly, the engine would still make a sound. The engine whirred to life, but rather than climb back inside, my dad remained outside, rifle in hand. In the dark he couldn't possibly see the thing from a distance, meaning by the time he'd got it in his sight, it would most likely be too late to pull the trigger. Seconds after turning on the car, a horrendous, continuous scream cut through the air, getting louder as the monster was rapidly approaching our location. My dad fired a shot into the darkness, guided by nothing more than the sounds of the screaming. He then fired again and again, preparing to get off a fourth shot as something stepped onto the roof of our car, bending it inwards. I dove down to avoid having my skull caved in, losing sight of my dad who had remained outside. He let out a pained yelp as his rifle fell to the ground with a soft thud. As I lifted my head to get a peek at what was going on, I could just see something wrapped around my dad's legs, pulling him up into the air as his screams mixed with those of the tall creature. I wanted to call out for him, but I knew better than to give away my position just to get taken like my dad. So, I crawled through the damaged car in silence, attempting to reach for the rifle that had fallen into the snow. Though I hadn't ever been allowed to hold a firearm, I had been thoroughly lectured on its safety. I made it through the trunk, crawling outside into the snow. The storm had subsided, and the skies had cleared, revealing a near full moon that cast a dim, white light upon the snowbound landscape. Above the car stood the creature, holding my dad's leg in one twisted arm. It stood at least 10 feet tall, its silhouette contrasting starkly against the night sky. Antler-looking protrusions emerged from its shoulders, while its head appeared almost fused to its torso, its face indiscernible in the darkness. It stuffed my dad's leg into its mouth, closing down on it with teeth sharp enough to tear straight through the flesh. Having no time left to lose, I picked the rifle up, pointed it in the creature's general direction, and pulled the trigger. A loud bang reverberated through the night, leaving me deaf for a moment. I found myself on the ground, having been shoved down by the rifle's recoil. The shot had hit the creature, distracting it enough to let my dad fall into a pile of snow, but it didn't appear wounded. All I had achieved was to redirect its attention to me, and I had nowhere left to run. The creature gazed down at me, bending down close enough so that I could see its face reflected in the moonshine. It had large, round eyes, pitch black and empty, and a large gash for a mouth filled with rough, pointed teeth that extended for rows upon rows inwards. For a moment it just observed me, almost as if impressed with the fight I had put up. "Maddie!" I heard my dad yell, but it wasn't enough to distract the creature from its next victim. It began reaching out its hand, and I couldn't even yell as my own life neared its sudden end. "Leave him alone!" my dad yelled as he rolled down from the pile of snow. He grabbed onto the rifle, quickly cycled it before firing off another shot, this time hitting the creature directly in its eye. The impact was enough to send it into a fit of agonizing rage, but the pain also distracted it for long enough to allow my dad to push me in under the car, before he himself climbed under it. The creature, having lost sight of us, let out one final guttural scream, before leaving the car to search for us down the road, blinded in one eye and oblivious to our hiding spot directly under the car. Only once we were sure it had left the area, did we climb back into the still-running car, carefully closing the trunk. The moon was about to set, giving way to a new day, but we weren't safe yet. A large chunk of my dad's leg had been bitten off, and he was quickly losing blood. He tried to use his own belt as a tourniquet, and though it slowed the bleeding, he needed immediate medical attention. "Someone will come," he promised. "How do you know?" I asked. "You just got to trust me on this one. You just have to hang in there. You'll be fine." "What about you?" "I'm not going anywhere, I promise." But hours later no one had come, and my dad had fallen into a deep sleep from which I couldn't wake him. I lay my head on his chest and cried, knowing he'd soon be dead and there was nothing I could do to save him. Then the engine came to a pathetic stall, leaving me alone in absolute silence. The first rays of sunshine dared peek over the horizon, dancing among the snow-covered trees. If not for the horrors I'd endured, it would have been a beautiful morning. Finally, I exited the car to see if the road would lead anywhere, but it all looked identical under the thick layer of snow. I wouldn't know which way to take even had I had a map to guide the way. In the distance, I could see something shifting among the trees, and a faint whirring sound approaching our car. 5 snowmobiles emerged from the tree line, having spotted me from afar. I jumped up and down and waved to them for help. They were wearing bright orange outfits, with crosses on their backs. They immediately halted around our car and tended to my unconscious dad while one of them wrapped me in an orange heat shield. He tried to ask me what had happened, but I was too deep in shock to respond. All I could do was to look at them in shock while they loaded my dying father onto a stretcher, preparing to take him to a hospital. Using what little I had left of my cognitive function, I tried to warn them about the monster we'd fought off, but it all emerged as an incomprehensible word salad. They could respond by reassuring me that we were safe. But after all we'd seen, I wasn't sure I could believe them. Next thing I recall was waking up in a hospital bed, unharmed if not for the mild hypothermia I'd suffered. My grandmother sat by my bedside, sleeping in a chair. My dad was nowhere in sight. I cried for a moment, but she promised that everything would be fine. She explained that my dad had been taken in for surgery, and that they would have to remove his leg, but that he'd be otherwise fine. She asked me what had happened, but I wasn't sure I wanted to tell her before my dad was there to support my story, worried she would think I had lost my mind. She respected my wishes, reassuring me that I didn't have to talk about anything until I felt ready. My only task was to focus on my recovery. A couple of days later 2 men visited me in the hospital, casually dressed, but with strict expressions on their faces. They introduced themselves, but I couldn't take note of their names. They asked me about what I'd seen in the snowstorm, but unlike my grandmother, they weren't receptive to my refusal to talk without my dad present. I told them about the creature, and though they weren't happy about it, they didn't try to refute my experience. They only mentioned something about a threshold event, but didn't elaborate any further. They explained to me that my dad needed to be taken in for further treatment at their own facility to rule out complications of the attack. I asked to be taken with him, but they refused, citing infection risk as the reason for denial. They tried to reassure me that they'd do everything they could to take care of my dad, but they didn't come across it in a particularly genuine manner. I was discharged from the hospital after 5 days of treatment, and learned from my grandparents that 3 other cars were stuck on the same road that night, only a few miles apart. The passengers of those cars were never found. They were reported missing the following morning, but I already know that they won't be found. It would take another 2 months before I got to see my dad again, 2 months which I spent at my grandparents' place. When they finally let him go home, and though he was physically healthy apart from his missing leg, the mental toll had changed him. He spent the rest of the winter weeks staring out the window into the snow, only calming down once spring had taken over and melted away the snow. Even then he refused to talk about what we'd been through. Though he would acknowledge and confirm that the trauma we'd been through was real, he never dared go into detail. My dad died last year 19 years after the event from unrelated illness. He never truly got over the trauma of that night in December of 2005, nor have I. But surviving the memories without the only person that was there to go through them with me has shattered the little progress I've made. The uncertainty of it all, and the lack of answers have left me unable to forget. I'll always remember my dad for the man he was, regardless of the events of that night. A man that would have done anything to keep me safe, full of life, determined, and loyal. For various reasons I can't give my name. I've had to alter certain details, such as names, in this to save my ass, but the public needs to know. I am being locked up tomorrow, and need to get this out now. There are monsters in the world. Beasts, creatures, aberrations, horrors, and more. I work in a facility that contains them, located deep in the Pacific Ocean. Almost every folkloric and mythological creature has a kernel of truth to its story, and that's where we come in. For example, the Draugr of Norse mythology. They're more than shape-shifting, dream-infiltrating zombies. The real beasts are what we call a level 6 threat, one of the kinds you don't survive by accident. We don't know how they appear, but they can walk through space-time like a frayed seam being pulled apart, and it allows them to fall ever so slightly out of sync with the material world. They are classified as the species Reanimatus vigilans, the watchful reanimated. But I digress. I'm here because something escaped the facility, and we can't find it. The creature, which my colleagues and I affectionately call the Surgeon, first appeared in 1888. It is the only creature to ever receive a level 8 threat classification. The Surgeon was discovered in the wake of the Jack the Ripper murders. The crime scenes turned heads in certain directions and caught the attention of my organization. We got involved and noticed certain substances in the victims. No one knew what it was, but the organization had the brains to collect a sample and keep it. A thick, red goo, with the texture of maple syrup and the smell of copper. Then, in 1902, a gruesome murder occurred in Russia. A poor girl, no more than 19 years old, was found mutilated in her home. When I took the job of studying the Surgeon, I read the files, and I still can't get those images out of my head. At this murder, that substance was found again. The organization caught wind and began investigating more thoroughly. We came to the conclusion that the substance was a paralytic. Anyone who is exposed will lose the ability to move, but retains all feeling. After the Russia incident, any murders with this substance were kept confidential. Only the immediate investigators and the organization were allowed to know. Panic, superstition, any public trace would have compromised everything. And with more knowledge of the Surgeon's M.O., we got better at finding them. From 1902 to 1984, the Surgeon claimed the lives of 96 innocent women. We finally caught him by using certain tools that could get me thrown into the depths of hell for naming. What we found shocked us all. A middle-aged man in a Victorian-era doctor's uniform, blood-covered gloves dangling at his sides, stood over a woman. Sadly, we didn't catch him in time, and we lost her. Her chest was a gaping cavity, and although her heart was beating when we got there, she showed no other signs of life. The capture attempt was a catastrophe. I've reviewed the footage and transcripts enough times to know every second by heart. One agent approached to place the restraints. The surgeon spoke to him quietly. Not a command, not a threat, just a sentence. The agent halted, turned back toward the team, and after a moment of hesitation raised his rifle and pulled the trigger. The surgeon grabbed a rag soaked in the victim's blood and thrust it into the face of another agent. Blinded, she stumbled and fired wildly, hitting 2 of her own teammates before crashing to the floor. Containment was achieved only after repeated anesthesia darts, restraint nets, and overwhelming force. Even then, it felt less like a victory and more like he had allowed it. The tapes of when the surgeon was brought in are difficult to watch. He was so polite, cooperative, almost eager to talk. I still remember them to this day, more clearly than I'd like. "So, do you have a name?" asked Dr. Otto, with a tremor in his voice that could match an earthquake, his hands shaking as he held the pen. "If I did, it is long forgotten to me, doctor," the surgeon replied with a remorseful smile. "Right. Well, we've been following you since the late 19th century, no name. Can you explain how you're still around?" "Certainly, doctor." He leaned back in his chair as he looked around. "I learned at a very young age that life is precious. So precious, in fact, that it can be guarded, taken, and traded." "What do you mean by that?" "Well, I found that if I played the right tendons like a violin, and drummed the right organs, I can move life from someone to another." "So, you're stealing their life?" "Oh, doctor, you make me sound so savage. I perform symphonies of life that only I can hear." He was looking directly in Dr. Otto's eyes as he said this. He leaned forward, eyes bright with something like joy. "Right. Well, tell me, why were they all women?" Dr. Otto shifted slightly in his chair, averting the surgeon's gaze. "They are life-givers, doctor. Pure life." He cackled as the words danced out of his mouth. The tape continued in a similar vein, with the surgeon being open. Some of the staff had an issue with it, saying he was too open. Hindsight is 20/20, they were right. 2 days ago I was sitting with him in his cell. Blackjack on the table between us, and a pile of cigarettes on his side and a much smaller pile on mine. "Hit or stand?" I asked, eyeing the pitiful amount of wager I had to give. "John, it is an 8. Of course I hit." His laughter coated his words like honey, as I pulled a card and placed it on his side. "A 10, now's the moment of truth." My guts swirled and tensed. "Hit or stand?" He sat in his chair, stroking his mangy beard. His eyes focused so hard on the deck of cards by my side, I thought he was somehow reading the cards. "Hit." The confidence in his voice sent a small shiver down my spine. I slowly drew a card and placed an 11 down. He cheered as I flipped my own card to reveal a whopping total of 19. "Good game," I begrudgingly said as I slid my last cigarettes over to him. "We switched from money long ago, ever since I had to pay for my little girl's medical bills." I just told him we used the cigarettes because of immediate gratification. "Indeed, my good sir." He took a cigarette and lit it up, the smoke dancing in the manufactured light of the fluorescent bulbs. He took a long drag as I packed up the cards and then offered me a hit. "You know, John, I have not left my cell in, 9 months, I think." "Correct. You get 1 day a year, you know this." I waved the cigarette away as I finished putting the cards in their box. "Yes, I know, prisoner safety and such. But John, all the other prisoners are in bed by now, and my legs are aching so much. I give you my word that I merely wish to walk the grounds and stretch, free of the shackles." He looked me right in the eyes as he pleaded. It appears to us that the surgeon has never lied. It's one of the more fascinating things about him. He has the ability to do so many things, but seemingly not deceive. He confessed to murders we never found, breaking our rules, even escape plans, all because he got asked. "Surgeon, you know dash," I began. "My medicine, John." He cut me off. I have never said how I make it, or even what it is. If you let me have this walk, I shall reveal it to you. A soft smile sat on his face. Fucking fine. I sighed as I unlocked his shackles. You won't tell anyone I did this. One trip around the block, but I'm accompanying you, understand? John! Language? He laughed. But yes, I understand. Don't worry, hands in front of me the whole time, walking 6 feet ahead of you. We began the journey, slowly tracing the block in tandem. He swayed as he walked, roaming from area to area with seemingly no pattern at all. We spoke intermittently about various things. All of them were meaningless chatter, but one was important. John, how is your daughter doing? I know her illness is a rare one. His voice casual, as if it were something we'd spoken about many times. How do you know about her? The words tore out of me. I tasted copper and hospital lights in my mouth. It is my duty, given by the goddess, to know the well-being of all your kind. He stared at a wall while walking and talking. I can see it all, John. The beating of your fragile hearts, the rushing of your oxygenated blood, the stretching of your worn muscles. You call me the surgeon, and you are right. I am a physician of sorts, perhaps a mortician, an apothecary, who truly knows. Why would you ask about her? My hand was slowly reaching towards my radio, ready to press the panic button. Do not call for help, John. There is no need. I am not going to hurt you. He smiled as he looked around. I froze, my thumb hovering over the red button. His smile was too calm, too knowing. What dash? Before another word could escape, I felt my neck freezing. My joints locked in place. I managed to look down and see that red, thick liquid splattered across my chest. I do not make the medicine, John. He cooed as he stared at me. I pull it out of you. Blood is a wonderful thing. It can control your whole existence. My movements became more restricted. I felt my skin tightening until I couldn't even blink. I could feel the signals from my brain, firing at full power telling my body to move, but nothing happened. I could feel the tendons and joints eagerly awaiting orders, trying to move on their own, but nothing happened. A faint groan escaped my clenched jaw. Ah, John, he tooted. It is okay. I am just going to stretch my legs. Do not worry, I am a man of my word. I will not make you experience pain. He slowly paced around my frozen body. Those drawer you have in Bay 4 are lovely fellows. He let out a grin unlike any other I've seen, far too wide with dead eyes. Do you want to see a secret they showed me? He chuckled as I saw him begin to blur, as if he was vibrating on the spot at the speed of sound. His laugh became distant, and in an instant he was gone. After hours of waiting, I could move again. Then after even more hours of debriefing, I could move freely again. Hours of alarms, questioning, lockdowns and field teams being deployed. I told them to not contain him again. Kill him. On my way out of my commander's office, he called out to me. John, wait a moment. He barked with an authoritative gravitas. There's something I don't understand. Off record, of course. I turned around and saw him kill the power to the recording device. What's that, sir? My eyes averted his gaze as I turned around. The surgeon mentioned your daughter. We've had him marked as an ontological threat, but I can't get over that final line from him. What if he's an ego threat? Why does it have to be one or the other? I muttered as I left. I then realized that we had spent so much time categorizing these creatures, we didn't consider the possibility that they can merge and blur the lines between black and white. That suggestion brought about even more chaos. An ontology threat can rewrite time and space. An ego threat can rewrite humans. It doesn't touch reality at all. It touches us. Whatever part of you thinks it's still you. As far as I knew, ego threats were theoretical, but now I'm wondering otherwise. Before today, I wouldn't have even considered that blood magic he did to exist, but now I'm researching our archives. Babylonian and Canaanite cultures using blood rituals. Paracelsus and Agrippa considering blood for alchemy. Hemomancy throughout history. Earlier today I was filing through files, and I got a small paper cut. I instinctively brought it to my mouth and sucked on the wound, but what I tasted wasn't blood. It tasted like curdled milk covering rotten eggs. I drew my finger away, holding back a gag, and I saw the substance trickling down my index finger. As soon as it made contact, I felt that locking sensation again. My fingers refused to obey my mind's command to bend. One of the facility doctors confirmed through many blood tests. They all show barely any hemoglobin, and so much of that syrupy substance, yet somehow my vital signs remained inexplicably normal. My blood is his medicine. Tomorrow I'm getting locked up as a new type of creature in this prison of ours. I've been given 1 day to get my affairs in order. The surgeon wears the shape of a man. Around 184 centimeters tall, with black hair and pale skin. He has 1 green eye, and 1 brown eye. His voice is soft, almost kind and patient, with a faint British sound. If you see him out there, run. I've told you what I can. The rest I've changed. For your safety and mine.